Good conversations with our children don't just happen, they are intentional and require some amount of effort on our part. Otherwise, when we ask a question, we get a flat one-word answer, as in good, fine. When we ask, how was your day today? Whether we're at the dinner table or in the car on the way to practice, the questions we ask shape the depth of connection we experience with our children. Join us for this episode of BaseCamp Live as we explore how intentional questions can spark richer conversations and deeper relationships at home and at school.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to BaseCamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of BaseCamp Live. Davies Owens, your host, here with you on the journey of raising up the next generation. It is always a joy to hear from you. You know, podcasting is an odd way to communicate because I speak and I know thousands of you listen, but it's a joy to hear back from you. It is a privilege when I get an email or I'm out at a school speaking and I get to hear comments about different episodes and conversations that were sparked through the conversations that we have here each week on BaseCamp Live. A special shout out in this episode to Diana McKee, head of school at the Imago School in Maynard, Massachusetts, as well as to Cameron Cook, head of school at Veritas Academy in Austin, Texas. A big shout out to you, your teachers, your parents, and everyone in your community who are part of the BaseCamp Live and Zipcast communities. We appreciate your support and your partnership each week. It is a joy to have Mandi Gerth back on BaseCamp Live. She was on recently, and I thought this topic of questions is one that I want to make sure we address as soon as we can, because having a conversation today in a world that is so often distracted is increasingly difficult. And I appreciate Mandi's insights and wisdom. She's a former K-12 teacher in a collaborative model classical Christian school. She lives in Dallas, Texas. She is currently the administrative director of the Cowan Center at the University of Dallas. She holds a Master's of Humanities degree from the University of Dallas with a concentration in classical education. For over 20 years, she and her husband have labored to build a family culture for their 5 children that values books and baseball, museums, home-cooked meals, and conversations about ideas, no doubt filled with great questions. Her first book, Thoroughness and Charm from Circe Press, was the topic of our past BaseCamp Live conversation. This particular episode is sponsored by our great friends and partners at the Herzog Foundation, as well as Wilson Hill Academy, the Wise Phone, the Champion Group, and Robert Littlejohn with wisdomandeloquence.org. Of course, Zipcast is always one of our partners because it's part of the great source, because Zipcast is part of the great resource that we offer to now more than 100 schools around the country. If you're not familiar, check out Zipcast.media. Without further conversation on my part, let's jump to the interview with Mandi Gerth. Mandi, welcome back to BaseCamp Live.
Thanks for having me. It's a joy to be here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited about this topic. It's one that I think everybody runs into this challenge with children, whether they're younger or older, is trying to think of ways of having meaningful conversations. Mm-hmm. And I know that it's something that we want to establish early because the importance of having that relationship and that connection is something that really is not just getting through the carpool line and having a conversation. It's kind of conversations and connection for life. How do you see, when you think about just the power of questions and communication, what are you seeing?
I think that knowing how to ask good questions of our children creates so I wrote an article for the Classical Difference, and I quoted in there Eva Braun, who is a tutor was a tutor at St. John's in Annapolis. And she talks about questions as opening up an expectant vacancy. And I think we want that as parents, but we're also sort of scared of it, and we don't necessarily, it's not efficient, or it can't be, it's not easily contained, right? So sometimes when my girls will get in the car after a day of school and I will ask a question, it'll become clear to me that the answer to this question is going to take some time. And it's going to require me to ask some follow-up questions. And I had just been thinking that it was going to be a quick answer and move on, and then I could continue to check my email at the stoplight. Right? So the problem with that is me, as the parent. I wasn't prepared for what was going to fill the vacancy I opened with my question. And I'm not actually loving my child very faithfully in that moment when I don't want there to be an actual conversation. I wanted it to be much more cut and dried. I wanted to go through the motions of connecting to my child, but I didn't actually want the time commitment or the emotional vulnerability that would be involved in that. And so I think it's important that we ask them questions and that we prepare for what might fill the vacancy.
Well, I think that's a really important point here at the beginning to make, which is, do we really in our heart of hearts want to ask them a question that might require a time to then have the conversation? Because in our hyperspeed world and it's the inconvenience of having to actually have a conversation is something that maybe at a subconscious level is there. So let me ask a short question so I can feel that I've asked something and engaged my child, but really I want to get back to my thing. So that's honest. That's raw. I think we have to really decide, are we serious about this? And are we willing to make time for this? Because the statistics I often quote, I think the average American family spends about 17 minutes physically in the same room with each other. And of that, probably less than a minute or two, even into seconds of any kind of conversation other than, hey, don't forget your gym bag. So it's such a countercultural idea of even having a conversation led through winsome questions. And so I think, do we want that? What do you see as the typical kind of questions that families ask or that parents often ask their children in the course of the day that are maybe fairly thin? What do you see? What do you think is often asked that's maybe not such a good question?
Right. So I think you can realize that a lot of your conversation with your kids revolves around the logistics of their schedule. Mm-hmm. That basically what you've talked about all day long are logistical questions and answers. They have nothing to do with substantive growth, emotional maturity, spiritual growth. You haven't actually conversed with them in a way that allows them to connect their present circumstance to any sort of wisdom or virtue. Yeah. And that is not going to build your family culture. It is not going to bond your children to you in a meaningful way that will outlast the logistics of your life. And I think that's the heartbreak of what we're touching on here, is that you spend 18 years with your children and you pour yourself out logistically and financially to raise them, and what you want at the end of it is a meaningful relationship with adults who will continue to be in your life even when they don't have to be. And I think the real work of that is done in those 18 years when you have them at home. So it's a great, just again, the significance of what we're talking about with learning to ask good questions is literally a way to invest in a future relationship when, 30 years from now with your children. This is the type of conversations we have. This is normative. It's not just, to your point, just schedule logistics for the day. That's not very substantive. What are other questions? And we're going to get to some good questions, but just sort of thinking about what's too often the case. My observation, I'd love your thoughts, is that the kids get in the minivan after school, and the first question, the easy kind of fluff questions, are things like, did you have fun today? And did you get a good grade on that science test? What's the problem with questions like that? Right. Or did you eat your whole lunch? Right. Right. Like those sorts of, like, I'm checking in eternal on you kind of questions that are very important. Right. So better questions might be, who did you sit with at lunch today? Mm-hmm. Who sat next to you? Who sat across from you? What did you talk about? You could ask, did you participate in the Socratic seminar and during history class or during literature? Did you participate? Yes. No. How did you participate? What did you ask? Did you ask a question? Did you answer one of your teacher's questions? How did you participate today? Yeah. So it has a lot to do with framing the question in terms of how and why, not just, you're trying to ask open-ended questions, not just yes and no questions, and not just like, I'm checking in on your behavior questions. So things like, what did you talk about today in literature class? Mm-hmm. Where are you in the text? Right. Just asking them to things that they can give you some sort of data that feels like an entry to a conversation. So maybe they're not warmed up to this idea yet either. And you can just start by saying, like, what part of Frankenstein are you guys on?
Right.
And then they can tell you back.
The questions you're framing obviously require some degree of awareness, which is probably the first challenge is, oh, I didn't even know they were reading Frankenstein, or, oh, I didn't even know you had a Socratic discussion day. So part of that is, challenge one is, how do you even know what's going on so you can ask a good question? That would seem to be important.
So you definitely need to read the emails that come home from your parent, from your teacher, and from your administration. You need to read the emails that tell you what they're doing in class. And then you just need to pay attention to what they're doing at the kitchen table. What homework are they doing? So my daughter will come home and she'll be working on her Euclidean geometry, and I'll just lean over and I'll figure out which proposition are they on. Like just even that information is helpful. Like, where are you in the book? Are you at the beginning? Are you in the middle? Are you at the end? And then if I want to dive in and I want to watch a YouTube video on that proposition so that I can help her or I can understand what she's learning, I can do that if I want to. But the first step is actually paying attention to what they're studying.
Well, you did a wonderful job in the article, and we will link it in the show notes, but you've walked through kind of 3 different types of questions, and I'd love to unpack some of those. But before we get into the first one, again, just to put an emphasis on this very important point of not only paying attention, but really your questions are always sending a signal of what's important. So back to, if you say, did you have fun today? You're effectively telling the child that the point of school is having fun or not having fun. Or if the question is, did you get such and such a grade? Now the grade is the whole point, right? So, I mean, there's a value system that links to questions. Help us think about that.
There is. And I didn't really understand this until I was starting to think this through as a teacher. And I heard people talking about how, we're supposed to be creating all of this virtue. And then I started thinking, I did some reading and some thinking about it, and that there are moral virtues and that there are intellectual virtues. And then I thought, well, how do you create intellectual virtue? And then I started thinking through, like, kind of what you're talking about. What becomes normative to the students by the way that you ask your questions. Mm-hmm. So when you ask certain questions and you don't ask other questions, you are in essence forming them. Like, you are beginning to shape them and form them, and to say that we are the kinds of students who ponder these questions, not these questions. So even what you ask and how you ask it is pedagogical. And so that's why I was starting to think through, like, how would that look? What does that look like for parents? And are we sending the same message? And we absolutely are. Yeah.
It's the whole simple idea of, it's more what caught than taught. So what is communicated, what is asked, what is celebrated tends to be what is perceived to be valuable. So good point. Well, let's jump in. Before we go to a break, let's start out with kind of the first type you identified in the article, the questions that check for understanding. Help us understand what that's about.
Right. So I put together this talk for ACCS based upon Mortimer Adler's chart in his Paideia proposal book. And he breaks learning down into 3 columns. And the first type of learning, he says, is kind of just your nuts and bolts. Like, do they understand the content? Mm-hmm. But he says that even when you are just lecturing to your students, or you're just having them read something, which is that sort of direct instruction, questions are never off to the sides. They're never off stage. So even when you're lecturing or you've assigned reading, your students should be thinking, what is she going to ask me about this? Or what they should be asking questions of themselves, like, oh, I wonder what that means, or, oh, I wonder if he means this, or they should be trying to pick up the allusions and the references and make connections themselves. So even just when they're seemingly just absorbing the information, there still is questioning involved. And so that's that first type of questioning. And so some of the examples I would say for parents would be, like, what did you read in literature class today? What book are you reading? Where are you in the book? What happened in the passage that your teacher read to you today? Just having them basically narrate, like retell what they learned today or what they did today. And that's also like the question, like, who did you sit with at lunch today? What did you play at recess? How did it go? Did everybody get a turn? Did anybody get upset? Like, just having them start talking through what happened and showing an interest in what happened to them, what they learned.
And what I'm hearing, because we all know, I don't know what happens, maybe it's hormones in fifth grade or something, but all of a sudden you ask them something and it went from something fairly eloquent maybe, or at least multi-worded, to singular answers, good, yes, and I wonder, part of that is because we're asking questions that can only be answered, or are, yes, no kinds of, are you reading Beowulf? Yes. Okay. Very different question from, what was happening in the story today and the segment, to your point. So it's a question that can't be narrowly answered. It requires some narrative to get it to respond back thoughtfully.
Right. So that's kind of that first level, is that you're just trying to kind of get them
to understand.
You're trying to get into what they learned, and you're trying, or if you're just trying to sort of get up to speed, you're just asking, like, did you do a science lab today? How did it go? What were you studying? What were you hoping for? Do you have to write a formal lab report tonight about just asking questions about what happened to them at school, and getting that first level of information. But that's not where we want to stop. That's not where we want to stop as parents. And that's helpful, because it gives us context and it begins to establish the relationship.
Right. Well, let's take a break, because I want to get into this now that we've established kind of the facts, the information. How do we then take them to that level of really forming the intellectual habits and the deeper conversations? So let's take a real quick break. We'll be right back and continue our conversation. I'm here with my friend Joanna Hensley, head of lower school at Wilson Hill Academy, to tell you about their exciting new program. Maybe you already know about Wilson Hill Academy. We talk about Wilson Hill all the time on BaseCamp Live. They're known for their really effective and helpful online classical Christian education they offer. They have lively courses for students in grades 3 through 12. But what you may not know is that Wilson Hill is now offering a rich early learning program they call Forma for students in K through second grade. I'm here with Joanna. Joanna, tell us more.
Oh, thanks, Davies. Forma is such a wonderful way to begin a lifelong love of learning.
We talk often about the cautions of technology, so let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. Are you encouraging kindergartners to be on Zoom all the time? Is that what this is?
Absolutely not, Davies. Forma does not involve putting 5-year-olds on Zoom. Forma is a program that gives to parents valuable guidance from an experienced mentor teacher who walks them through a carefully curated curriculum for teaching reading, math, nature study, and enrichment like picture study and music, all within a like-minded, encouraging community.
I love what you guys are doing, especially for children in those younger ages. How can folks learn more about what you're doing with Forma?
They can visit our website, wilsonhillacademy.com/Forma, Forma.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Joanna. During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. Mandi, help us understand, after we've established with our children, our students, that they understand or we're on the same page of the content, how do we then move them into a deeper conversation around the intellectual habits?
Right. So what I realized when I was teaching logic school students is that the follow-up questions I was asking them were actually habit-forming questions. So we would be reading something aloud, and I would ask for a narration, and then I would have sort of like an open-ended question, and a student would provide a response to that question. And usually my immediate follow-up question was, can you provide an example from the text? Or I would ask for them to make an analogy, or I would compare their answer to a different student's answer. So I was immediately building, I was always asking follow-up questions. And what I realized about those follow-up questions is that they were actually forming intellectual habits, in the sense that students understood that just throwing an opinion out on the table was not going to be enough for Mrs. Gerth. Like, she was going to ask that answer be compared to something else, that it be explained by analogy, that it be reasoned through logically, that evidence be provided. So they started to understand that there was intellectual work that went into providing the right type of answer to the question. And so as parents, what I think how we mirror that, or how we do that at home, is that when your students answer something, you immediately come back with a follow-up question that requires them to explain what they mean further, or provide some sort of comparison, or even like give an example from what they were reading that supports what they said, or ask them to compare it to something else, right? So if a student is saying, this is the part we're at in Great Gatsby, I'm not really quite sure who this character is or why this character is introduced, you can ask a follow-up question like, well, did your teacher explain that? Or what did your teacher say about that? Or, do you think that character is in there to be, like, why do you think that character was introduced? What has that character done so far? Could it be that character is in there to be a contrast to a different character? Can you think of like somebody else in the story that's very different from that character, or very similar to that character? So you're asking things that require your students to make comparisons, to think through why they think what they think, to use examples, to go to other things that they know, or other things that they have heard, and try and find some overlap. So this is kind of what we mean by like dialectical thinking. So your student or your child will make a claim about something that they're reading, and then what you want to do is you want to provide something else for them to hold up next to that thing, and hope that through your questioning and through your discussion, they're going to move closer towards the truth by having had to put those two ideas which seem to be in tension into some sort of unity.
And what you're describing, I'm going to put a highlight on this because I think it's a very significant point of differentiation of what classical schools are even intending to do. Most of us, and this is perhaps part of the challenge, the backstory for a lot of us as parents, is that type of literature engagement for schools, most schools today, most of us growing up, was literally, give me back some of the facts. In fact, here's the pop quiz on name the 3 characters that did such and such. And then because of the whole deconstructionist world we're in today, the conversation tends to just be, what did this make you feel? Or what did you think about it? And it's really not forming them to have thoughtful engagement with the living ideas in the text. So this is a very significant aspect, distinctive of our classrooms, that is all about, as you're describing, the formation of intellectual habits. So this is part of the bigger project that sits behind the questions.
Yes, it is. And I want parents to understand that they can come alongside their schools and come alongside their teachers and build on this momentum. So if this is how your student is used to talking in the classroom, they can talk to you like that at home too. But you just have to be aware of the fact that this is how they talk in class. And you can ask them to talk with you like that as well. So you can ask them follow-up questions. It's
just so intimidating because it's not the way most of us experienced education. And it's even increasingly in an AI world, we're going the opposite way. Like, it's not about pondering and thoughtful questions and looking at it from different aspects. It tends to be a very kind of wooden factual engagement. So again, we're asking not just to ask good questions, but to participate in something far more significant here with the formation of intellectual habits. So I don't want to lose in the kind of tactical, this bigger story, which is what makes our schools so formative and significant in what we're doing in forming a generation.
Yeah. And I think if we're honest with ourselves as parents, what we want at the finish line is we want children who will give us good advice when we need it, right? So you want to raise the kinds of children who, if you say to them, I'm not really quite sure if I should take this job. I'm not really quite sure if Dad and I should move. They will give you good advice. Like, you have raised them to be wise and virtuous, and you actually kind of need them in your life. And they want to be there, right? So at the finish line, we want to have that kind of relationship with our students and or with our kids, right?
Yeah.
We want to have that with our kids. And we get that, I think, by being willing to have these sorts of ongoing formative conversations with them, where they're used to talking through things with us and wrestling through things with us, so that when later in life they're like, I'm not quite sure if I should marry this person. I'm not quite sure if I should take this job. I'm not quite sure if I should go to this college. They're willing to have a conversation with you about it because you've been having conversations like this all along.
That's right. And even the sort of funny idea, but it's not so funny. It's like, they're going to be probably picking your nursing home someday. So you want it to be, with the equal flimsiness of sort of like, I don't know, that one's close. I guess they have some comfortable chairs. Let's go there. I mean, it's kind of the same approach to literature. Or could we actually think through at a deeper level, which is what it means to really be a well-formed human that knows how to have good intellectual habits. So these have real life consequences on these ideas.
Right. And I think that one of the things that we're hitting on is that we as parents often feel ill-equipped. We feel unsure whether or not we're going to do it right. And what our pastor was always very kind to say to us, like, have you ever raised a daughter before? Is she your first daughter? And we'd be like, yes. And he'd be like, well, then are you going to make some mistakes? And we're like, yes. So, So like, I think we also need to understand that we're doing a lot of these things for the first time. And so we're going to stumble and we're going to make some mistakes, and you're going to have thought to yourself, like, I'm going to ask these really great questions on the way home today. And your daughter's going to get in crying because of something that she heard in the hallway. And so your whole conversation needs to pivot and change because she has something that she needs to talk to you about. So there's just this idea that relationships are living and they evolve and they require a lot of investment and sacrifice.
That's a great reminder, Mandi. And I suppose, is it safe to say, or is it reasonable to say that you can't really mess up asking a question? You can ask weak questions or maybe questions that don't emphasize what's most important. But how are you going to mess up? Just ask the question, and either it falls flat and you need to find another question. But the risk of messing up is pretty low in the question world.
Right. You might just not get the information you want.
You may not get what you want. Right.
Right.
Well, ask another one. Keep going. Yeah.
Yes. So I think one of the reasons why this is a more natural habit for me is that one of the things that I studied when I was an undergraduate was journalism. And so I just right from the get-go would have to call people and try and get the information that I thought we needed for the article. And if you weren't getting the answers that you needed, you had to just keep pivoting and asking different questions until you got something that you knew you could use. Yeah. And so as parents, I feel like sometimes we just need to pretend that we're journalists. Like, I really do want to know what part of Jane Eyre you're in and what you think about Helen Burns. Like, please, can we have this conversation? And sometimes you just need to keep asking and keep asking and keep asking until you get that, until you feel like you've had a conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. Put the journalist hat on, ask the questions. You may not always get the answers you want, but keep going. It's the persistence that's there. I love that. Let's take another break and we'll come back, and I want to hear, you have a third type of question that is in the article. I'd love to get your input and thoughts on that.
Sounds
we'll be
good.
right back after this little break.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We're excited to be proud sponsors of Zipcast and BaseCamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these two great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Today's episode of BaseCamp Live is brought to you by my friend Chris Casper, who you heard on a recent episode. His invention, the Wise Phone, is a much-needed third way, providing a solution from the dangers of a smartphone on the one hand and the limited capacities of an old-school flip phone on the other. His simple, distraction-free phone design for families who want technology to serve their real lives and give us and our older children a way to do basic essentials like calling or texting or maps without the web browser and the social media and the endless apps that can pull them and us into the addictive time-wasting aspects of a smartphone. I personally have a Wise Phone, and I can vouch that it is an excellent solution and an appropriate way to use technology that supports virtue and focus and healthy habits. Check out the link in our show notes and on our BaseCamp Live website partners page, where Chris is offering BaseCamp Live listeners a discount.
Mandi, I love the encouragement that there's really no way to mess this up other than just continue to be persistent and trying hard. And I love the vision of let's see question asking. It's not just to create conversation, but it's part of this bigger project of really forming their intellects, their habits, and ultimately who they ultimately become in life. There's a third point you make, or a third type of question you indicate in the article around contemplating big ideas. Help us understand that.
Right. So again, Adler's 3 columns had to do with checking for understanding, building intellectual habits, and then his third column had to do with pondering big ideas or kind of. And most of the time, these third column questions are interpreted to be what you would do in a Socratic seminar or a Socratic discussion. And oftentimes we feel like, well, that just only happens in the upper school with the 9th through 12th graders. They're the only ones who are prepared to have these sorts of Socratic conversations in the classroom. And I try to encourage teachers not to think of it that way, but to understand that even your kindergartners and your first graders can be asked questions like, why couldn't she sleep? It was just a pea that was stuck under her mattress. Like, why? Why is that? Is it just because she's fussy? Or does her inability to sleep on anything less than perfect reveal something about who she is, about her nature, and what might that be? What's true about her nature? Is she worthy of the prince? Mm-hmm. You know, like they can ponder those things and contemplate those things with you. Another thing that I had a student tell me recently who was in my very first 5th grade classroom, she said to me that it occurred to her when they were having a history Socratic seminar, and she's a senior. She said, it occurred to me that we're doing nothing different than what we did in your classroom in 5th grade. It's just that the texts are harder. And I was like, she got it. She got it.
Figured out my secret.
Ding, ding. Yeah, but that's what we should be doing as classical teachers. Like the pedagogy is the pedagogy. The texts get harder, and the questions are more, they're deeper, right? They're just so.
Sure.
So I want teachers and parents to understand that you can be asking these sorts of virtue contemplating, idea-based questions of all your children. They just stage differently, and the things that you're talking about change over time as your kids mature and their interests change. But so these are the sorts of questions that have to do with like moral responsibility and goodness and nobility. So if you're having a conversation with your child about Jane Eyre, you can sort of say something like, well, was Helen right about whether or not she deserved to be punished? What does that tell us about Helen? What does it tell us about her teacher? What does it tell us about Jane? Why is Jane so adamant that Helen didn't deserve this? Right? So these are sorts of questions that get to what's underlying what happened in the book. And do you believe that? Do you think that's true? Can you tell me where in the Bible that would be supported? If we had a conversation about this passage with your grandparents, what would they say? If we talked to your pastor about it, what would he say? So giving them the ability to sort of contemplate these moral things, like What is my moral responsibility now that I have been exposed to this text and I have considered what it says and the claims that it's making? What am I morally responsible to do about it? How is it going to change? How is it going to change me and change the way that I see God's world?
What is so important here for parents and educators to understand is this is where, again, I think classical really has the ability to move beyond just sort of a wooden engagement with Christian theology and scripture. So it's not, again, just a litany of information or here's random scriptures, but in the moment that these major ideas, why am I here, purpose of life, big questions are coming up, you're now weaving in scripture, not in a mechanical way, but you're asking, I love the idea of, what does your pastor think about this? Or what would your grandparents say about this? To show that there's an integration of faith and life in a way that's a lot richer and complicated at the same time that these questions push the student towards, which I think is really significant.
Yeah, and you want them to be comfortable having these conversations with you about these things because you want them to happen with you. Like you do want them to happen with you. You trust your teachers and you know that the teachers have been hired by the administration because of their virtue and because of their intellectual acumen. But you also want to be having questions with them about things that matter to you, about baptism and about confession and about, you want to be a voice at the table when these things are being discussed. And so you need to be asking these sorts of questions and creating that vacancy, which requires time and investment. And I know that families are strapped for all of that. But my encouragement would be there's really no better investment that you could be making with your time than really making sure that your children know that you care about them deeply and you care about what they think and what their the choices that they're making and you want them to understand that the things that they think become the choices that they make, and the choices that they make become sort of their moral direction. They set them on a path, and you care about that, and you want to walk with them and walk beside them because you care about what happens at the end.
And to that end, Mandy, I was actually speaking in a school in Texas last week, and a parent came up to me and said, I want to make sure that classical education goes far enough in really helping students wrestle with the actual issues of the day. And I think we can maybe stop short sometimes of bringing in the contemporary moment and the real issues that are there. And part of the reason, of course, that you mentioned Gadsby. We read these pagan books because in some sense, it's giving us a front row seat of what evil and bad decision-making looks like and how it's basically been inoculated by having actually had the conversations around it. So I think part of the task of the parent, especially in those upper grades, is to actually, and the teacher, is to inject real world, how do you deal with gender dysphoria, or how do you deal with, lack of anything of absolute truth, or, disparaging things of the West, whatever. Any of these things are part of the real world that these students are going to move into. So it seems like, again, well-placed questions against the big ideas, against scripture, is training them to be able to navigate the complexity that they're really going to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they just need to get comfortable having these sorts of conversations. And as their parents, I know that it is your heart's desire to have those moments of connection with them, and that you really do want to make sure that the investment that you're making by sending them to a classical Christian school is something that's going to have lifelong benefit, and it will transform who they become. So by getting involved this way, by making these intentional choices about how you're going to spend your time in conversation rather than in silence, or rather than listening listening to something on the way home from school, rather, you're going to make an investment of asking questions and being willing to hear what happens. And I think that would be my last and final sort of piece of advice for parents of teenagers, is that a piece of advice that I got was not to be shocked or embarrassed or scared of what happens, or what comes out of their mouths, or what they're actually thinking. That you have to build up a sort of shock factor. Like let them say, like, I'm really struggling with this, and I don't think I need to go to church anymore. Like, let them say it. Like, let them say it. You want them to say it to you rather than holding it in. And let them say it, and ask follow-up questions, and just get invested, and let them, don't don't communicate to them that you are not a safe place for them to reveal all their scary thoughts, because we do all have scary thoughts, and we need people around us who will help us walk through those scary thoughts and point us back to Scripture and pray with us, right? And pray for us. And you want to build that kind of a relationship with your kids.
Well said, Mandi. Thank you so much. I know that there's the full article in Classical Difference. We'll put that in the show notes for people that want to read all of this in full. Other resources you might want to mention for folks to consider?
If your school is an ACCS member, you can go out to past conference talks and you can find the art of the question out there. So you could listen to the full lecture that I gave to the teachers that were present in Atlanta a few years ago. That might be something that would be helpful. I think I've also written something on my Substack related to questions too. So there's just a few different places where I've talked about how important it is for us to think through the kind of questions we ask our kids and our students so that we can continue to build these habits and push them to grasp the bigger fundamental answers to the bigger fundamental questions.
It probably would be pretty good for marriages too. Just that'll be a separate podcast. But if you get good at asking your kids questions,
I'm not putting my toe in those waters.
No, the whole time I'm like, it'd probably be good for couples to talk too, and probably asking questions. Yeah. So all of these things, everybody in your universe will benefit if you're a good question asked. If you can ask good questions.
That's
so,
true.
Anyway,
I will support that claim.
Yeah, that's right. Mandi, thank you so much. We'll definitely continue with future conversations on BaseCamp Live. I so appreciate as always your being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BaseCamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.